Well, thank you very much, Todd, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to share with you some of my experiences in the CIA and offer also some thoughts on the world situation. This is a very timely and important topic because my organization, the CIA, is very much on the front lines of protecting America. I wish I had better news for you, but the truth is that never in my career have I considered the world more dangerous for America than it is right now. The most imminent threat, of course, is Islamic fundamentalist terrorism, particularly homegrown terrorism. We will be hit again. It will be inside our own borders. It will be a weapon of mass destruction, and it will be horrific. That's bad enough, but we have other serious threats to our country's security as well. And no region of our country is immune. No sector of our economy is immune. Long term, I believe that China is the number one security threat to our country. What the Chinese are doing in our country already is outrageous. They are recruiting our citizens. They are stealing our technology. They are interfering in our elections. And they're using cyber to attack our classified databases, our financial sector, and yes, even our electrical grid. Not far behind China is Russia. The level of Russian espionage in the United States today is higher than it was at the height of the Cold War. Vladimir Putin is obsessed with America. I first worked against Vladimir Putin when he was still a lieutenant colonel in the KGB in East Berlin, and we knew already what he was. We knew already that Vladimir Putin was a ruthless killer with absolutely no scruples, and we believe that he is even more dangerous today than he was back then. And we also know, of course, that Russia, like China, has a very sophisticated and effective cyber capability that they are using very aggressively against the United States. So if we throw in North Korea, Iran, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, narcotics traffickers, organized crime, we have, in national security terms, the perfect storm. So what do we do? I'm biased, of course, but I happen to think that the best hope we have to keep America safe is intelligence. And there is a big debate going on in our country and in the administration right now about what the proper role of the CIA should be in protecting America. So Kevin and Michelle thought it would be useful, and I hope interesting, to familiarize you a little bit today with who we in the CIA really are and what it is that we really do. It's a world that most Americans know very little about. And often what they think they do know is badly distorted by the books, the movies, the TV shows, and the other popular media. I'll be happy to take any questions you have at the end about my experiences in the CIA, about the CIA in general, about the war on terror, current events, or anything else that you have in mind. So I'll ask that you just text those questions in, and we will handle as many of them at the end as we can. But before doing anything else, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to make it absolutely clear where I stand. I believe that the greatest and most powerful country in the world, ours, must have the very best intelligence in the world to protect its citizens and to defend its vital interests. And so if that's true and America needs intelligence, then it's also true that America needs spies. And I am proud to say that my wife Meredith and I were spies for the CIA and for our country for 31 years. And you know, I've got to tell you, even now it feels strange to be standing before a group talking openly about spying. Because for the entire 30-plus years that Meredith and I were on active duty in the CIA, we were undercover. We could not tell anyone where we really worked or what we were really doing. During all those years, my parents in Iowa did not know that I was in the CIA. And Meredith's parents did not know. And none of our friends knew. And I bet you can imagine what a shock it was to all those people after all that time when by regulation, Meredith and I were required to come out from undercover for me to accept a professorship at the George Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University. The CIA does not allow its officers to be on college campuses covertly. No one had suspected anything. Unfortunately, by coming out, we lost some friends. Some of our friends could not or would not accept that we'd been lying to them all those years. They felt that we had somehow betrayed their friendship or violated their trust, and I really regret that, because I think what they did not fully appreciate was how vitally important cover is to us in the CIA. And I'm sure the reasons for that are obvious to all of you. First of all, we need cover for effectiveness. You're not going to be a very effective spy overseas if everybody knows who you are. So you have to pretend to be someone else. You have to pose as something else. And of course, that's what we call your cover. And secondly, we need cover for safety. Because what we in the CIA do for a living, what Meredith and I did for a living, espionage and covert action for our country overseas, can be, and in our case, often was, a dangerous profession. And so you need cover for the safety and protection of you and your family. Living under cover isn't easy. It's a difficult and demanding way of life. You never really get used to lying to everybody about who you are, living that double life. It helped me a great deal in living that difficult undercover lifestyle that I met Meredith at the CIA. Meredith was already working there when I arrived, and she already understood the culture of the CIA. She understood the risk we would face in our life together. She understood the sacrifices we'd be called upon to make. And maybe most importantly, Meredith understood the event we were to marry and to be blessed with children, what the implication would be of raising a family in that kind of lifestyle. I should point out, by the way, the CIA is a great place to meet people of the opposite sex. Because when I met Meredith there, I knew she'd had a thorough background investigation, got regular polygraph exams, and of course she knew the same things about me. I am a proud Iowan. Do we have any Iowans in the audience? Oh, terrific. I graduated from the University of Iowa. I studied mathematics and economics. When I graduated, I took a commission in the United States Navy. I served for 4 years as an officer aboard guided missile destroyers and frigates. I really love the Navy. I seriously thought about staying in, But I finally decided I wanted to go back home. I wanted to go back to Iowa. So I left the Navy. I applied for law school at the University of Iowa, was accepted, and that was my dream at the time. I wanted to get my law degree, practice what I thought was an honorable profession in a small county seat town in Iowa, serve my community, maybe even run for local office. At that time, this was before Meredith, okay? Find a nice Iowa girl, settle down, and raise a family. What I thought then and still do is the perfect setting for that small town, rural America. And I was on track for that dream. Until one Friday afternoon, which I'll never forget because it changed my life. I was in my last year of law school. I was sitting in my dormitory room in Iowa City when the phone rang. And the voice on the phone said, "Mr. Olson, we think we have a career opportunity that might be of interest to you." Well, that sounded great to me. I was already job hunting. So I said, "What would that be?" And he said, "Let's just say it would involve serving our country in a different way." Does that sound just a little bit strange to you too? It did to me. I remember saying, "Sir, may I ask who's calling, please?" I thought that was a fair question. And he said, "We'd rather discuss that in person." He said, "Can you be in the lobby of the Hotel Savory in downtown Des Moines?" That was about a 2-hour drive from Iowa City. "Tomorrow at 1 o'clock. I said, "Well, I suppose I could, but how will I know you?" And of course, he said, "Don't worry about that. We'll know you." Can you all help me out here? How stupid was I to go to that meeting? I went to that meeting because I thought it was the Navy. I was still in the Navy Reserve. I figured, this has got to be the United States Navy getting back in touch with me to see if maybe I'd like to go back on active duty for some special project. So I drove over to Des Moines, walked into the hotel lobby. 2 gentlemen approached me. The first thing they said was, "Mr. Olson, we are from the Central Intelligence Agency." I almost fell on the floor. That had never occurred to me. I barely knew back then what the CIA was. And then it got real serious real fast because the next thing they said was, "We need your word of honor right now that you will not reveal to anyone," and we mean no one, not your parents, not your brothers, not your sister, not your best friend, not your girlfriend, no one, that you have had any contact with us whatsoever. They said, "If you cannot swear to that, then this meeting is over." Well, what would you do? You'd probably be curious like me. So I gave them my word. We sat in the corner of the lobby for 2 hours. They did know a lot about me. It obviously went well because at the end of the 2 hours, they said, "If you would like to pursue this, we'd like to invite you to Washington discreetly at our expense as the next step in the process." He said, "In a short time, you will get a letter mailed to you at your law school address in Iowa City. It will be on United States Department of Commerce letterhead." He said, "The letter will be inviting you to go to Washington to interview for a position as a lawyer with the Department of Commerce." He said, "That letter will be from us, and you should follow the instructions in that letter, and when you get to Washington, we will find you and take you away for the real meetings." In the meantime, they said, if anybody needs to know why you're going to Washington, you can show them that letter and tell them you're interviewing with the Department of Commerce. But then they reminded me, "Do not forget," they said, "you cannot tell a soul why you're really going to Washington." And I still can't believe it, but that's what I did. And sure enough, they intercepted me shortly after I got to Washington. They whisked me away to a safe house in Virginia. for several days of really intensive interviews, aptitude testing of various kinds, foreign language testing, physical fitness tests, a complete medical exam. They actually had a laboratory right there in the safe house. Psychological screening like you would not believe. And then a whole series of polygraph exams, lie detector tests on every, and I mean every, aspect of my background and personal life. Is that about the same way you screen all your new employees? It's pretty thorough. I clearly passed because shortly after I returned to Iowa City, I was discreetly recontacted and offered a position in what we call the clandestine service, the Directorate of Operations, the undercover espionage and covert action arm of the CIA. I was intrigued by that offer. I eventually decided to accept it, but I still went ahead and finished law school. And I still took and passed the Iowa bar exam because I remember distinctly, as I was packing up in Iowa City to head east, I was determined that I would do this CIA thing for just a couple years. I guaranteed myself, Jim, after 2 or 3 years, you are going back to Iowa to pursue that original dream you had. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. And I don't want to belabor the point, but the truth is that service to our country and the art of espionage quickly got into my blood, and I realized very early on this was what I wanted to do with my life, to help ensure that this great country of ours had the very best intelligence in the world. And you know, in Marathon, I look back on our long CIA career now, we have no regrets. In fact, we have a nice, warm feeling to know that we were, as we saw it, privileged to have been able to have served something we believed in so deeply, and we know to have made a difference. Like all new CIA officers, then as now, it hasn't changed. I had 2 full years of training before my first overseas assignment. And the training is really good. Most of it takes place at this undercover base in Virginia that we call the farm. And down at the farm, a lot of the training is paramilitary. So we learn about a lot of different kinds of weapons. Weapons that in some cases, those of us who have been in the military, we're already familiar with, but also some very ingenious weapons. Things designed exclusively for us by our engineers, things that did not look like weapons, things that look like that you might carry or wear routinely on your person every day, but when modified by our engineers, were very deadly. My students at the Bush School sometimes ask me, Mr. Olson, what was your favorite CIA gadget? And that's hard to answer because we had so many good ones. But when pressed, I tell them, I think my favorite CIA gadget was my belt buckle. I said it was just a single shot, but sometimes a single shot is all you need. When you retire from the CIA, you're supposed to turn all your gadgets in. Some of them are just too good. Anybody want to see my pin afterwards? At the farm, we also learn our own form of hand-to-hand combat. Now, let's not beat around the bush here. Yes, we are trained to kill with our hands. I'd like to ask for a volunteer to come up now for a demonstration. If everybody's pointing at everybody else, that probably wouldn't be a good idea. We learned about explosives. That was fun, how to blow things up. And that's because sabotage has been, and I think always will be, one of our important missions. We learned how to jump out of airplanes. And that makes sense too, doesn't it? Because if we're going to be inserting, as we often do, a single operative or a covert action team into a remote hostile area, Sometimes the only way to do that, or the best way to do that, is from the air. That's why we continue to require that our officers be fully jump qualified. Okay, I have a question for you now. When I joined the CIA, I was part of a group of 25 young people from all around the country. We all went through this training together. Would anybody like to guess back then how many of those 25 were men? 24. Believe it or not, we actually had one token woman. And Sally was definitely a token at that time because for all intents and purposes, we were a male service. In fact, we thought we were so macho and so cool. We had our own jargon. Everything was kind of based on male bonding. And I'm not saying necessarily that those things are bad, but what I am saying is that today we are a much stronger clandestine service for being totally diverse. Today we recruit large numbers of young women into the clandestine service. And we make no distinction in the training our young women receive or the kinds of assignments that they have once they complete the training and are certified as what we call overseas CIA case officers. Meredith was a pioneer. Meredith is one of the first women to go through all that training at the farm and to serve overseas as a full-fledged CIA operations officer in her own right. Meredith and I were what we in the CIA call a tandem couple, a husband and wife team. And we really like that, and we have lots of them in the CIA. And Meredith and I found it very, very satisfying to be able to go off on CIA missions together. Now, on occasion, Meredith and I would each have our own separate missions. And unless we had a need to know, which we rarely did, we wouldn't know what the other separate missions were. But the overwhelming majority of our work for the CI was done as a husband and wife team, and we really enjoyed that. When I think of the role of women in the CI today, I'm reminded of this young woman who came into my office down at the Bush School a couple years ago. She was just starting our 2-year master's program there in National Security Studies with an emphasis on intelligence. She told me that she came from a small-town farming background. She said she'd never been outside the United States. But she sat down in my office and said, "Mr. Olson, I've been thinking on it. I've been praying on it. And I think I'm genuinely interested in considering a career in the CI's clandestine service." I said, "Jill, that's great. I'll be glad to help you in any way I can, but first let me explain to you what we in the CIA do and the kind of training we go through." So I'm doing that, and she stops me. She said, "Mr. Olson, this is not going to work." I said, "Well, why not, Jill?" She said, "Well, because I know I could never jump out of an airplane." I said, "Jill, that's okay. You won't need to jump out of an airplane because there'll always be someone standing next to you who'll be glad to push you." This story, of course, has an amazing ending because Jill followed through. She completed our master's program. She learned the required foreign languages, and she was recruited by the CIA's clandestine service. And as we're all sitting here comfortably and safely today in this beautiful location, they never guess where Jill is. Jill is in Afghanistan, and she is leading a CIA covert action team in Taliban-controlled territory. And I'm so proud of Jill, I can hardly stand it. At the farm, we also learn what we call the tools of the trade. Every profession has some skills that are required. We at the farm learn surveillance, clandestine photography, how to tap a phone, secret writing, how to bug a room, what we call flaps and seals, how to open packages and envelopes without leaving a trace, lockpicking, all those things that we read about in the spy novels and don't always seem real to us. but for us in the CIA are part of our everyday skill set. After all of that training, as good as it is, you're still not ready for that first overseas assignment. What more might you need? Foreign language. So if your language for the country you're being assigned to isn't already up at the very, very high level we require, you're going to get some additional one-on-one, total immersion, intensive language training. I happen to think that the CIA has the very best foreign language training in the world. If you have the aptitude, and you do, or we wouldn't have recruited you in the first place, we can take you from zero to full operational fluency in a very short time. It's grueling, believe me, but we will teach you the language. The CIA taught Meredith and me 4 different foreign languages: French, Russian, German, and Spanish, and that's by no means unusual. That's a very typical CIA career. Okay, you're getting closer, but you're still not there yet. There's one last thing that you have to do. It's very important. We've touched on it briefly already, and that's cover. We're going to be assigning you a cover. And so that you look right to the outside world, and so that nobody suspects anything, guess what? You are actually going to have to do that cover job. That's why we match the cover we give you to your background, your education, your interests, so that it is something that you will be comfortable doing, and also so that family and friends who know you well will consider it plausible if that's something you might actually be doing. In our case, shortly after Meredith and I were married, we were assigned to Paris. I went out under international banking cover. No one in the Paris branch of that bank where I was working knew the truth. So what did that mean? Well, it meant I had to go to that bank every morning, put in a full day's job as a banker, keep my unwitting banking supervisors happy, make a lot of money for that bank, and then do my spying on nights and weekends. So you all figured it out, haven't you? That's right. In effect, you are doing 2 full-time jobs. And the implications of that on lifestyle, family life, marriage, and children are obvious. You cannot do this kind of work unless you have a spouse who is as deeply committed to our country and to the mission of the CIA as you are, and who is willing to accept that level of sacrifice. It will not work otherwise. Of course, in my case, it was easy because Meredith was also one of us. It seems like the few times that I was home, Meredith was off operating somewhere. And I wouldn't know where she was, what she was doing, what identity she was using, or when she'd be back. But when she did come back, then I'd disappear. And she wouldn't know any of those things about me. Later on, when we had children, the CIA was always very good about providing us with nannies. So we had childcare available immediately if Meredith and I needed to go off together on some urgent mission. And don't worry, those weren't just ordinary nannies. Those were CIA nannies. And I can assure you that those CIA nannies were well-trained and well-armed, and we had no concern about leaving our children in their care and protection while we were gone. Meredith and I probably had a dozen different identities when we were in Paris. We had forged passports, driver's licenses, credit cards, diplomas, life histories, addresses, phone numbers, family members, pocket litter, disguises to go with each of those different identities. All of this spy gear we hid in our apartment in Paris in what we call concealment devices. These concealment devices might look like an ordinary piece of furniture, but it had actually been manufactured by CIA carpenters. So they had concealment cavities buried inside them for us to hide all of this incriminating material. And why was that so important? Well, because what Meredith and I were doing in Paris was a crime. Not under U.S. law. We would never violate U.S. law. We all swear an oath to the United States Constitution. But under French law, espionage is a crime in every country. In fact, under the French criminal code, if you were caught spying on French territory, regardless of what country you're doing it for, you are liable to up to 40 years in prison. I can guarantee you that is not an idle concern for those of us like Meredith and me who go out under what we call deep cover without diplomatic immunity, because we know and accept going into it that if we get caught, we will be on our own. If we get caught, we will do the time. If we get caught in almost every instance, the CIA and the United States government will disavow any knowledge of us. And of course, that's the way it has to be, to protect first and foremost our country's interests. Meredith and I sadly have dear friends from the CIA who had the misfortune of getting caught in the act of spying overseas without diplomatic immunity. And they're in prison right now. And we don't know when, if ever, we will get them out. I changed covers several times for reasons I won't go into. After being a banker, I was a journalist. I was a book publisher. I was in the travel industry. I sold fertilizer. In fact, I changed cover jobs so often that to outsiders it really looked as if Jim Olsen could not keep a job. And that didn't bother me so much, but it drove Meredith's father crazy. I think Meredith's father thought that she'd married this worthless guy who couldn't stick with anything very long. Meredith's father is this very successful attorney out in Washington State, where she's from. He knew I had a law degree. Why couldn't I do something with it? I remember we were visiting Meredith's family out in Washington State once when we were back in the country on home leave. We had 3 children in Paris. They were still small. I, as usual, was between jobs. And Meredith's father was genuinely concerned about my ability to support his daughter and these 3 little grandkids. So one day when we were out there, I'll never forget it, he took me aside, just the 2 of us. He said, "Jim, I don't want to interfere in your business, but I just want you to know that if you ever need a job, you have one right here in our law firm in Ellensburg, Washington." I said, "Dad, that is so nice of you. I'm very touched by that, but no thank you. I'm sure I'll find myself one of these days." You know, when we came out from undercover, I think it was Meredith's father who was happier than anybody else to find out that this loser son-in-law of his had actually been doing something consistent and I think in his eyes honorable for all those years. My relationship with my father-in-law kind of went from here to here after he realized that we were actually in the CIA. Cover becomes a big issue too when you have children. Think about that. What do you do about your children? And the CIA leaves that up to us. I'm grateful that it does. We can tell our children the truth or not as we see fit. Many of our colleagues in the CIA go through an entire career undercover, retire undercover, and never tell their children the truth. And for whatever reason, that works best for them, and that's fine. That's their decision. Others of us aren't really comfortable lying to our own children forever. We love them, of course, and we're proud of what it is that we've actually been doing for our country. We'd like to share that with our children if we can. But if we are going to tell our children the truth, we can't do it when they're too young. Why is that? No, they'll tell everybody. We're also concerned if they're too young, it might be too much for them. It might be too frightening for younger children to know that they are part of a CIA family overseas and that there's danger associated with that. So if we do tell our children, we usually wait until late high school or early college years. And that seems to work best. How do you think the kids react? Well, in different ways, as you can imagine. We've got these good friends. We were talking about this. They said when they told their daughter when she was about 17 or 18 the truth, her reaction was to run to her room, slam her door, jump on her bed, and cry nonstop for quite some time because her parents had lied to her. Her mom and dad hadn't trusted her. And she was brokenhearted. She felt betrayed by her own parents. And unfortunately, that sense of betrayal is not uncommon among CIA kids when we tell them the truth. Every time I think about this, I'm reminded of John and Nancy, good CIA friends of Medicine Mine. We served together in Moscow. We were reminiscing on this subject. They said when they told their daughter Leslie the truth, when she was about the same age, 18 or so, she reacted with relief. I said, John, what do you mean by relief? He said, when we told Leslie we'd been in the CIA all those years, she said, well, thank goodness, Dad, that's what it is. Because I had always sensed that there was this big family secret, and I was afraid that maybe you and Mom were brother and sister or something. Isn't that awful? In our case, our hand was forced when Meredith and I were serving in Vienna. You may or may not know this, but Vienna, Austria has been and continues to be a real battleground of espionage. Meredith and I were doing some really aggressive operations against some Iranian terrorists that were operating in and through Vienna. And to this day, we don't know how, but somehow those Iranian terrorists found out that the CIA was behind their problems and that I, Jim Olson, was the CIA chief of station in Vienna. So the Iranian terrorists sent me a letter. And very ominously, they mailed it to our home address in Vienna, where Meredith and I were living with our 3 children. I'll never forget that letter. I've kept it all these years. It started out, Dear Infidel Dog. Don't you just hate letters like that? Anybody else ever get one? Kevin, you ever get one like that? Close? Not yet? You kind of know right off it's not going to be friendly, right? It was a death threat. It was a serious death threat against me by name, against Meredith by name, and against each of our 3 children by name. The CIA actually offered to pull us out of Vienna because of the death threat to the children. And it was really Meredith, a remarkable woman, kind of contrary to all maternal instincts, who said no. She said, we've been sent here with a mission to perform. We're not going to be chased away by an ugly letter from some terrorist. I wasn't concerned about myself. I had all the training. I took all the appropriate precautions. I was always armed, always wore my vest. My car was armored. I had bodyguards whenever I needed them. And I hope you're not going to misinterpret what I say now, particularly you ladies, because it may not sound very loving or chivalrous on my part, but I wasn't worried about Meredith either. I wish you could all meet Meredith sometime. You'd see that she's petite, she's feminine, she's beautiful, but she's also really dangerous. Meredith had all the same training. Meredith is more than capable of taking care of herself. You would not want to mess with Meredith. So our real concern, of course, was the children. And even though it was earlier than we would have liked, because our oldest, Jeremy, was only 16 at the time, we felt that because of the death threat, we needed to bring him into the picture. So we took Jeremy aside. We sat him down in an acoustically secure room. We said, listen, Jeremy, Mom and Dad are in the CIA. We are a CIA family. There has been a death threat against our family. and we need your help. That's kind of a lot to put on a 16-year-old, isn't it? He said, you need to watch out for your little brother and sister. Make certain you always have them in sight, always together, that you get on the same school bus. You need to be alert to your surroundings. If anybody's watching you or loitering or following you, you've got to get in touch with someone in a position of authority right away. Jeremy reacted with pride, as we'd hoped he would. He did a really good job of watching out for his little brother and sister. And with his help, and a lot of other precautions we put on the children that they weren't aware of, we were able to stay and finish our assignment in Vienna. I can tell you that we all felt a lot better when we got those Iranian terrorists. And then when they were a little bit older, we were able to tell Joshua and Hillary the truth. And they reacted with pride too. And speaking of pride, I hope you won't mind if I tell you how proud Meredith and I are of our 3 children. Jeremy, the oldest, went on to become a United States Marine Corps officer. And he's out now and is doing campus ministry, which he feels called to do. Our second son, Joshua, was a United States Navy officer. He's just gotten out and he's in graduate school working toward his goal of becoming a high school teacher. And our youngest, our daughter Hillary, is a missionary in Ethiopia. So it's very gratifying to Meredith and me as parents to know that our children have all chosen careers of service to others in one form or another. Meredith and I were talking about our children the other night, and I said to her, you know what? None of our kids will ever make any money. Meredith said, that's okay. They've chosen the right path. There are a lot more important things in life than money, and of course, she's right about that. When I tell my CI friends that Hillary is a missionary in Ethiopia, they say, sure she is, Jim. I think she really is, but I might not know. It's kind of funny. When we told Hillary that we were in the CIA, she was a teenager. So she took that on board, and then a couple of days later, she came back to me all serious. And she said, Dad, I want to know the truth. She said, I want to know if you ever traced any of my boyfriends. I said, Hillary, of course not. I would never do that. That would be a violation of your privacy. So I lied to my own daughter. You're darn right I traced those guys. I think I'd be negligent as a father of a daughter if I had the capability, and I didn't do it. But just don't tell Hillary, all right? Meredith and I worked in a lot of different countries. Some we talk about, some we don't. We worked against a lot of different targets. Our number one target over the years was certainly the Russian KGB. But we also worked at other times against the Chinese, Iranians, Cubans, North Koreans, terrorists, nuclear proliferators, narcotics traffickers, organized crime. Practically any threat that you can think of to our country's security, we worked against at one time or another. It has been a wonderful journey. And Meredith and I both say the same thing. That is, if we could, we'd like nothing better to be able to go back and do it all over again. Meredith and I really envy young people today, particularly the young people that I have the honor of working with at the Bush School at Texas A&M University. Because Meredith and I know that if young people today choose, they have the opportunity to serve in things like the CIA or the FBI or the military or similar organizations. And we know that if they choose to do that, that they will have a vital mission of national security to perform for our country. We also know if they choose to do that, that they will have the same deep sense of satisfaction in their careers of service to our country that Meredith and I were privileged to have in ours. I think I'll stop there, and as promised, I'll be happy to take any questions. Todd, have any come in?
They have been coming in ever since you took the podium.
Okay. All right.
There are a lot of questions. Many people want to know how hard it was for the CIA to make the decision to allow you and your wife to come out.
Yeah. For many, many years, the CIA had a policy of no comment, no comment, no comment, and we weren't allowed to speak out at all. But beginning in about the late 1990s, we changed that policy. Our critics were to be able to say anything they wanted about us, and they did. We were frankly maligned repeatedly. So we decided we would be more open. And we would authorize books, like my 2 books. We would send people to university campuses to teach intelligence, as I'm doing now. We would allow our officers to go out and speak to groups like this one, and try to explain to the American people what it is that we in the CIA do, because what we do for you. Our sole mission is to protect the American people. And I think there have been a lot of misconceptions, so Meredith and I are authorized to come out and speak. We know where the line is. We know what we can say and what we can't say. We'll never go over that line. I have another book up at CI right now going through pre-publication review, and it's a very painstaking process. They've had my book for almost 6 months. They go through it with a fine-tooth comb, looking for any possibility that something classified could sneak in. But once it is released from there, it will go to the publisher. So we're very careful about that. And so we know exactly what we can say, and the CI welcomes our doing it.
How much of a concern is there about ISIS in America?
ISIS is bad news. ISIS is, without question, the worst terrorist threat we've ever faced. And the reasons for that are that ISIS is so big, it's so powerful, it's so well-funded, it's so ruthless, and maybe above all, because it's so good. They are a very sophisticated and formidable adversary. And what's really worrisome, of course, which keeps us all awake at night, is the fact that many young Americans, mostly Muslim males, are being radicalized in their hometown U.S. mosques, or on websites, or in their madrasas. Many of them are going overseas to Iraq, Yemen, Syria. They're being trained by ISIS, they're being brainwashed by ISIS, and they're being dispatched back to the United States as potential terrorists. And that's what we're seeing already. So far, they tend to be lone wolf, relatively small-scale attacks. But we can't count on that because they're going to form groups. And once they form groups, they're going to be capable of much larger attacks. You probably saw that the FBI not too long ago acknowledged that we can now confirm the existence of ISIS cells in each of the 50 states. So that's why I said homegrown terrorism is our number one worry. And we have hundreds, if not thousands, of young Americans who have gone over, who come back, and who have terrorism on their minds. And we are such an open society. We're very vulnerable. That's why I cannot be totally optimistic about our ability to protect our people and our institutions.
Are you concerned about the purchase of large agricultural entities by organizations, for instance, ChemChina buying Syngenta?
Oh, you bet we're concerned. Yeah, particularly China. China is rapidly acquiring businesses in the United States. They're making contacts. They're flooding their personnel into the country. Many of the graduate students that China sends to the United States are on intelligence missions. Their task is to complete their educations, usually in high technology, and then to stay here, to get sponsorship from an American high-tech firm or a national laboratory, to get that green card with that sponsorship. After 5 years of green card, they get citizenship. After 5 years of citizenship, they are eligible for top secret code word security clearances in the United States government. So we are hemorrhaging our secrets. We are hemorrhaging our technology. And China is without question the number one culprit. We need to wake up.
What do you think of Mr. Snowden and WikiLeaks?
What do I think of Mr. Snowden? Okay, Todd, I'm going to try to stay calm here.
Yes, sir.
But it's not going to be easy. Edward Snowden, I believe, is a traitor. I think he's a despicable human being. He did grave damage to the security of the United States of America. He put a lot of our personnel at risk. We believe some people have died as a result. He had no right to do what he did. And it really irritates me that there are some people who think that somehow he's a hero, that somehow he performed a public service. It's no coincidence that when Snowden was on the run, where did he go? First of all, to China, and now he's being sheltered by Putin in Russia. That tells you something, doesn't it? He is there because he is still intent on doing maximum possible harm to the United States by cooperating with our number one adversaries. So I have absolutely no hesitation in saying that I think Edward Snowden is a contemptible traitor. Did I make it clear how I feel about Snowden?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yes. The intelligence community in Washington, D.C., how is the political undertone for them at this point?
It's shameful what's going on now. My generation of intelligence officers prided ourselves on being non-political. We did not serve either party. We served the American people. We served the President of the United States because we were in the executive branch, and it made no difference to us which party was in power. What's going on now, I think, totally undermines that ethic that we had. We're seeing a politicization of the FBI, and we're seeing leaks, I regret to say, coming from inside the CIA for political purposes. And that is absolutely unacceptable. We destroy the whole concept of objective intelligence if we allow ourselves to be politicized. Shame on us. And I hope that the people who are doing those things will be uncovered and will pay a heavy price for it as examples, because this has got to stop. We cannot function as an intelligence community with this politicization that's going on.
How concerned are you about cyber warfare? Are there things that these people should do to protect their online identities?
Cyber is the future. I tell my students at the Bush School, if you want to have a successful career in intelligence or any aspect of national security, there are three things that you need to focus on, build expertise in. First is China, for the reasons I've already said. Second is money, financial intelligence. We must do a better job of tracking money movements of terrorists, organized crime, other bad actors. And the third is cyber. We're losing the cyber war. The offensive capabilities of the Chinese and the Russians, for starters, are far better than our defensive capabilities. And also, I don't think we're doing enough offensively. You know, we're a country where kids are on computers at 3, 4, 5 years old. We've got the most advanced technology in the world. We ought to be the best in cyber attacks against our adversaries. And we simply have not given it enough priority yet. But for all of you out there, if you are involved in protecting any kind of financial or proprietary information, I certainly hope that you have done a good job of building up your cyber protections, because they're coming after you. And agriculture is a prime target. We had a good example just up in my home state of Iowa not too long ago, where Chinese grad students were arrested for stealing hybrid corn technology, far superior to anything that Chinese have. And think of the millions and millions of dollars that they will save in research and development by stealing it from us. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because across the board, they're stealing every technology, every classified technique that they possibly can. Yeah, cyber is a very, very serious concern to the intelligence community.
I'm sure you're asked this many times, did Russia interfere in the 2016 election?
You know, I don't know. I haven't seen the proof yet. I was very optimistic when Mueller was named because I think the American people have a right to know what happened during that election. If there was interference, let's find out. Let's hold those responsible guilty for what they've done. But I haven't seen it yet. And it's been going on for close to a year now, this investigation, this intense investigation, and there's no smoking gun yet. I wouldn't put it past Putin, but you got to show me the proof. And I haven't seen it yet.
You talked about intellectual property as it relates to agriculture, other types of intellectual property. Is there concern about the food supply in the United States and anyone's ability to interfere in or disrupt it?
Absolutely. I'm surprised, Todd, it hasn't happened already. Our food supply is so vulnerable. It's not that complicated. We know already that ISIS has biological and chemical capabilities. Think of the panic. Think of the economic disruption and disaster that would result if some bad actor, some terrorist, and it could be even a single individual, somehow infected a feedlot or a shipment of soybeans or contaminated our water supply or even milk or vegetables in a supermarket and went from city to city and did that. We couldn't stop that. And the mothers of America, for starters, would be absolutely panicked if they felt that the food supply for their families was no longer safe. I would be very surprised if we don't see that kind of an attack from someone in the future, because it will be so easy to do.
We've got 4 minutes left, 2 questions. One is on the ODNI and the reorganization or consolidation of the intelligence community. I don't know what ODNI means, so I bet you do.
Yeah. That's a pretty sophisticated question. Who asked that one?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. Are you one of us? What's your cover? Agriculture cover? Does it work pretty well for you? Yeah. Yeah. This is off the record, of course, but most professionals that I know, including myself, are not very happy about the ODNI structure. We think it's too much bureaucracy. It's too many layers laid on top of what was already, we think, functioning pretty well. Our problem was not that we needed more coordination. We didn't need to bring 16 agencies under one umbrella. That's inefficient, and it has not worked. We simply needed more resources. Each of the constituent agencies of the ODNI structure, and the CI is one of them, knew what our missions were. We were capable of doing it. We were good at doing our jobs. Just give us the resources and then get out of our way. And ODNI, I believe, has put bureaucratic obstacles in our way and taken a lot of really good people offline to serve in that bureaucracy, people who are not out there really protecting the country. So I do not like the ODNI structure, and I was encouraged when President Trump seemed to be indicating that he might change that, might revert to the previous organization. I haven't heard anything more about that.
Finally, what's your long-term forecast for the geopolitical landscape?
It's not optimistic. The Cold War was bad, but what we have now is worse. During the Cold War, we knew where our enemy lived. We knew who they were. We had the power to destroy them many times over. We had deterrence. And even though they were in many ways a renegade state, the Russians, they still were a nation state, so they were bound by some norms of international behavior, some international law. Our adversaries today aren't bound by any of that. Terrorists have no rules, and they're invisible. We don't really have credible deterrence against them. And you've got rogue nations like Iran and North Korea that are on the verge of nuclear weapons capabilities and delivery systems that can bring to the United States. And countries like that cannot be deterred. I mean, just look at North Korea. North Korea is doubly dangerous because its leadership is mentally unstable. Kim Jong-un is capable of doing an irrational act. And if he ever should use a nuclear weapon, God forbid, against Japan, South Korea, or the United States, North Korea would be obliterated from the face of the earth. But I'm not sure that's going to stop him. I'm not certain that he makes that same calculation. So we, I think, are in for some very, very difficult times. That's why I said earlier that I consider the world more dangerous now than it has ever been during my career. Let me just conclude quickly, Todd, by saying this. This was really the bottom line. This was really the message that I was hoping to be able to leave with all of you here at Farm Direction. And the message is this. We should not and cannot forget, ladies and gentlemen, that our country is at war. And the global war on terror will be long, bloody, and deadly. We haven't seen the worst of it yet. But there is good news. And the good news is that we will win this war. We will win this war because of our superb military, our police, our firefighters, our emergency responders, and our intelligence personnel. And we will win this war above all because our best young people, like every previous generation of Americans, are stepping forward today in droves to answer the great call, the great challenge, the great threat of their generation. So I'd like to say, may God bless all those young people. May God bless Farm Direction, all of you and your families. May God bless all of our men and women in uniform, our police, our firefighters, and our first responders. May God bless all of our men and women undercover. And may God bless the United States of America. Thank you all very much. It's been a real pleasure to be here. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.